The eyes open after 200 years, and the first thing he sees is me. Not the priests who've spent 2 centuries tending his sleep, not the royal physicians in their ceremonial robes, standing ready with the silver bowl of noble blood they've prepared every full moon since before my grandmother was born. Me, a servant girl with a bleeding hand and no idea what she's just done. You, he says, and his voice sounds like it's been unused for 200 years, rough and ancient and terrifyingly aware. It was never supposed to be them. I look down at the cut across my palm, the blood dripping onto stone that's absorbed 2 centuries of careful ceremonial offerings from kings and princes and the purest royal lines in the kingdom. And I understand, with dawning horror, that I've just broken something that was never supposed to break. I've worked in the sleeping chamber for 3 years, and in all that time I never once believed the wolf was real. This isn't unusual. Most servants who tend the ceremonial spaces of Castle Thornmere stop believing in the old stories within their first month of employment. The sleeping chamber is beautiful, but static. A vast stone room beneath the castle's eastern wing, dominated by a massive dais, where an enormous wolf-shaped shadow rests beneath layers of ceremonial silk and centuries of dust. The priests maintain their rituals with unwavering devotion. The royal family sends their monthly offering, a small vial of royal blood. Drawn ceremonially and poured with elaborate prayer over the sleeping form. And nothing ever happens. 200 years of ritual, 200 years of royal blood, 200 years of priests, insisting that the sleeping king, that's what they call him, though no one living remembers why he's called a king or why he sleeps, is simply waiting for the right conditions to wake. I clean the chamber twice a week. I polish the ceremonial silver, sweep the stone floors, tend the eternal candles that burn regardless of whether anyone's watching. It's quiet work, solitary work, the kind of job given to servants no one particularly notices, which suits me fine, because I've spent my whole life being someone no one particularly notices. I'm an orphan, raised in the castle's servant quarters after my parents died of fever when I was 6. I have no family name worth mentioning, no prospects beyond continued service, no story worth telling except the unremarkable one of a girl who cleans stone floors and polishes silver in a chamber where nothing has happened in 2 centuries. That's what I believed anyway. Until the night everything changed. The accident happens on an ordinary Tuesday, during my regular cleaning rotation, 3 days before the monthly offering ceremony when the priests would perform their ritual, as they have every month for 200 years. I'm polishing the ceremonial dagger, the one used to draw royal blood for the offering, kept in a display case near the dais when not in ceremonial use, when my hand slips on the cloth I'm using. The blade, sharper than I expected despite 2 centuries of ceremonial rather than practical use, catches the edge of my palm. The cut isn't deep, but it bleeds freely, the way small cuts sometimes do, blood welling up faster than seems proportional to the wound. I curse under my breath and reach for a cloth to stem the bleeding, but in my haste, I fumble the dagger, and several drops of blood fall, not on the stone floor where 2 centuries of careful ceremony has never once been disrupted by clumsiness, but directly on to the ancient silk covering the sleeping form on the dais. I freeze. This is catastrophic. Servants don't touch the ceremonial silk. Servants definitely don't bleed on it. I'm trying to calculate the severity of my transgression, wondering if I should report it or quietly clean it and hope no one notices, when the silk beneath my blood begins to move. Not settling from the disturbance of my touch. Moving in the way that fabric moves when something beneath it draws breath. I stumble backward, my cut hand forgotten, watching in mounting horror as the massive shape beneath the silk shifts, stretches, begins the slow process of waking from something that was never meant to end. The waking the silk falls away like water, revealing what's been sleeping beneath it for 200 years. He's not entirely wolf. not entirely man, something suspended between forms, as though he fell asleep mid-transformation, and the sleep froze him there. Silver-dark fur along his spine and shoulders, giving way to skin that's unmistakably human across his chest and face. His size is staggering even in this partial form, filling the dais in a way that makes the chamber suddenly feel much smaller than it did a moment ago. His eyes open, gold, the specific, ancient gold that marks the oldest, most powerful bloodlines, older, I realize with dawning terror, than anything currently ruling this kingdom. You, he says, his voice rough with disuse, but carrying an authority that makes the stone chamber seem to vibrate with it. It was never supposed to be them. I don't understand, I manage, pressing my bleeding hand against my apron, as though hiding the wound might somehow undo what's already happened. He sits up slowly, joints and muscles clearly protesting 2 centuries of stillness, and studies me with an intensity that makes me want to flee the chamber entirely. 200 years, he says. 200 years of royal blood, offered with perfect ceremony, perfect devotion, perfect royal lineage. And none of it woke me. Do you understand why? No, I admit. Because royal blood was never the key, he says. It was never about lineage or purity or ceremonial precision. It was always supposed to be about something else entirely. Something the priests forgot, or never actually understood, in their 2 centuries of careful ritual. What? Sacrifice that costs something, he says. Blood given without ceremony, without expectation of reward, without any understanding of what it might unlock. Royal blood, drawn ceremonially by physicians who face no risk and expect glory for their service, that's not sacrifice. That's performance. You cut your own hand, by accident, doing menial work that no one will ever celebrate, and you bled onto my resting place without even knowing what you were disturbing. That's the actual key. That's what 200 years of royal blood could never provide. The revelation I should be terrified. Every rational part of me insists I should be running for the chamber doors, alerting the priests, letting people with actual authority handle whatever this catastrophe requires. Instead, I find myself asking questions. Who are you? I ask. What are you? The priests call you the Sleeping King, but no one seems to actually know what that means. He's quiet for a long moment, studying his own hands, still partially clawed, still transitioning between forms, like he's remembering something painful. I was Alpha King of this territory, 400 years ago, he says finally, before the current royal line existed, before this castle was even built on its current foundations. I ruled during a war that nearly destroyed everything, an incursion from creatures older and darker than wolves or men, things that wanted to consume the entire kingdom's magic and leave nothing behind. What happened? I stopped them, he says, but stopping them cost more than my kingdom understood at the time. I had to bind something of myself into a sleep that would outlast the threat, a magic so old and costly that it required exactly the kind of sacrifice you just gave me without meaning to. Real sacrifice. Blood given without calculation, without ceremony, from someone who has nothing to gain from giving it. The royal family, I say slowly. They've been trying to wake you for 200 years. Because they believe I'll restore some ancient claim to power, some legitimacy their current line lacks, he says. They've been offering blood, like a business transaction, expecting compound interest on their investment. It was never going to work. The magic doesn't respond to expectation. It responds to genuine sacrifice, freely given, without calculation. I think about this, about 2 centuries of careful ceremony that missed the point entirely because the point was never ceremony at all. So I woke you, I say. By accident. By bleeding on your blanket while cleaning a dagger. Yes, he says, and something almost like amusement crosses his face. 200 years of the most careful, elaborate royal ritual, undone by a servant girl's clumsiness. I imagine the priests will find that difficult to process. The complication the priests do, in fact, find it difficult to process. Word spreads through the castle within hours. The sleeping king has woken. The chamber that's been silent for 2 centuries now houses something ancient and powerful, and very much conscious. By evening, the chamber is full of priests, physicians, royal advisors, and eventually the current king himself, all demanding explanations, all trying to understand how 200 years of ceremonial precision failed while a servant's accident succeeded. I'm questioned extensively, my hand examined, the entire incident reconstructed in exhausting detail. The priests seem particularly disturbed by the explanation the wolf, who they address with elaborate, uncertain titles. Uncertain how to properly honor someone whose actual authority predates their entire religious structure, offers about the nature of the sacrifice required. "You're saying," the head priest says, his voice tight with barely controlled disbelief, "that 2 centuries of royal blood, offered by the finest lineages in the kingdom, meant nothing? That a servant's accidental cut succeeded where careful ceremony failed?" "I'm saying exactly that," the wolf, whose name, I've learned, is Kael, though the title feels strange applied to something so ancient, confirms the magic required genuine sacrifice. Your ceremony provided ritual, but ritual isn't sacrifice, it's performance. The current king, a middle-aged alpha named Doran, who's clearly struggling with the implications of everything unfolding in his ceremonial chamber, steps forward with barely contained frustration. "What do you require now?" he asks. "You're awake. Presumably that means something needs to happen. Tell us what you need, and we'll provide it." Kyle's gold eyes shift to me, still standing near the dais where I've been kept for questioning, my cut hand now properly bandaged by a physician who seemed more interested in the magical implications than actual medical care. "I require her continued presence," he says simply. The chamber goes very quiet. "That's not possible," King Doran says. "She's a servant. Whatever happened here was accidental. There's no reason for her to remain involved in matters of state." "There's every reason," Kyle says. "The magic that woke me responded to her specifically. Not to royal blood generally, but to her sacrifice specifically. I don't fully understand the mechanics yet, but I suspect removing her from this situation would be unwise, possibly dangerous, given how deeply the magic has now bound itself to her involvement. I have no idea if this is true, or if he's simply choosing to keep me nearby for reasons that have nothing to do with magical mechanics." But the priests, unwilling to risk further catastrophe with an ancient, powerful being they barely understand, agree to my continued presence in whatever process follows. The adjustment the following weeks are chaos, though a controlled, ceremonial kind of chaos that the castle seems well practiced at managing. Kael's transformation completes over several days, the wolf form receding fully into something entirely human, though his eyes retain that specific ancient gold that marks him as something far older and more powerful than anyone currently living. He's given quarters near the royal wing, though he spends most of his time in the sleeping chamber, seemingly reluctant to leave the space that held him for 2 centuries. I'm reassigned, somewhat against my will, to attend him, not as a servant exactly, since my role has become confused and undefined in the chaos of his waking, but as someone whose presence seems to help him readjust to a world 200 years removed from the one he remembers. "Tell me what's changed," he says, during one of our early conversations, sitting in the sleeping chamber that's become, strangely, the place where he seems most comfortable. "Everything," I say honestly. 200 years is an enormous span of time. The kingdom's borders have shifted 3 times. The royal line that rules now isn't even the one that put you to sleep. There was a succession crisis about a century ago that replaced the entire dynasty. And the war I fought? He asks. The creatures I sealed away? I don't know, I admit. The histories mention an ancient incursion, briefly, in the oldest records, but it's treated as legend now, not history. No one remembers it as something real. Something crosses his face. Grief, maybe. Or the specific loneliness of realizing that everything you sacrificed for has faded into myth while you slept. I gave up 400 years of my own life, he says quietly. Everything I might have built, everyone I might have known, all of it sacrificed to protect a kingdom that's forgotten the threat even existed. I'm sorry, I say, because I don't know what else to offer. Don't be, he says. You woke me. Whatever comes next, that's not nothing. The connection our conversations continue, expanding beyond the practical questions of what's changed into something else, something that feels, increasingly, like genuine friendship, despite the enormous gulf of power and age and status between us. I tell him about my life, the fever that took my parents, the servant quarters where I grew up, the quiet, unremarkable existence I'd built cleaning ceremonial chambers and expecting nothing more from my life than continued invisible service. He listens with an attentiveness I've never experienced from anyone, royal or otherwise. He asks questions that suggest he's actually interested, not performing politeness for a servant who's inconveniently become tangled in matters of state. You don't have to keep talking to me, I tell him, several weeks into his waking, during one of our evening conversations in the chamber. The priests seem to think I'm just a magical inconvenience that needs monitoring. You could ask them to reassign someone more suitable. I don't want someone more suitable, he says. I want you. Not because of the magic, though I understand why everyone assumes that's the reason. Because you're the only person who's spoken to me like I'm a person these past weeks, not a legend or a magical mechanism or a political problem to be managed. I'm a servant, I say. Talking to me isn't exactly royal etiquette. I was Alpha King before this castle's foundations were laid, he says. I've outlived every etiquette that currently governs this court. I'll decide who's worth talking to, and I've decided it's you. Something warm and dangerous unfurls in my chest at that. Something I recognize, with mounting alarm, as the beginning of feelings I have no business having for an ancient, powerful being who could have anyone in the kingdom. This is complicated, I say. Most things worth having are, he replies. The threat, the complication deepens when King Doran, increasingly uncomfortable with an ancient power center existing within his castle that he can't fully control, begins pursuing his own agenda. The sleeping king's waking is a political opportunity, I overhear him telling his advisors, in a conversation I wasn't meant to witness, but happened to be cleaning near. If we can secure his loyalty, his power, properly channeled through royal marriage, it legitimizes this entire dynasty in ways nothing else could. Marriage to whom? An advisor asks. My daughter, Doran says. Princess Wren. She's unclaimed, appropriately aged, and securing this kind of ancient power through royal bonding would settle the succession crisis permanently. I feel something cold settle in my stomach, though I have no right to feel possessive of Kyle's choices. No legitimate claim on decisions that belong entirely to him, and whatever political calculations he's willing to accept. When I tell him what I overheard, expecting him to receive the news with the kind of political calculation someone in his position should probably employ, he simply looks tired. They still don't understand, he says. 200 years of ceremonial blood offerings failed because ceremony isn't sacrifice. And now they want to offer me a political marriage, expecting that legitimacy through bonding will secure my loyalty, when loyalty was never about status either. What is it about, then? You, he says simply. It's been about you since the moment you bled on my resting silk, without any understanding of what you were doing. I have no interest in Princess Ren, or in political marriage, or in legitimizing anyone's dynasty. I'm interested in the servant girl who spoke to me like a person instead of a legend. Kael, I know what you're going to say, he interrupts gently, that it's complicated, that the gulf between us is enormous, that a servant and an ancient Alpha King make no sense as anything beyond an accidental magical connection. But I've lived 400 years, slept through 200 more, and I've never once felt what I feel talking to you. That's not nothing. I refuse to treat it as nothing simply because it's politically inconvenient. The choice King Doran doesn't accept Kael's rejection of the proposed marriage easily. The pressure builds over subsequent weeks. Diplomatic pressure, subtle threats to my continued employment and safety, increasingly explicit suggestions that a servant girl entangling herself with matters of ancient power might find her position in the castle, and the kingdom generally becoming untenable. I understand what's happening. I'm being pushed toward removing myself from the situation, toward accepting that whatever connection exists between Kael and me is inappropriate, dangerous, something that threatens the political stability everyone else seems desperate to secure. I should leave, I tell Kael, during a difficult conversation where I finally voice the fear I've been carrying for weeks. Not because I want to. Because staying puts both of us in an impossible position. You have 400 years of history and enormous power. I have nothing, no name worth mentioning, no status, no ability to survive whatever political consequences follow from an Alpha King choosing a servant over royal legitimacy. Do you want to leave? He asks. No, I say honestly, but wanting isn't the same as being able. Then don't leave because of what I have, he says. Leave only if it's what you actually want. Everything else, the politics, the pressure, King Doran's ambitions, those are problems I can address. I've outlived kingdoms. Ren, I can certainly outlast one king's frustrated political maneuvering. You'd choose me over legitimizing your position in this kingdom. I already have, he says. The moment you woke me with an accident instead of ceremony, I understood something the priests never grasped in 2 centuries of careful ritual. Real power doesn't come from status or bloodline or political calculation. It comes from genuine connection, freely given, without expectation of reward. You gave me that without even knowing what you were giving. I'm not interested in trading that for the kind of hollow legitimacy Doran wants to offer through his daughter. The resolution, the confrontation with King Doran, happens publicly, in the throne room, with enough witnesses that the political theatre can't be quietly managed or reversed. I won't marry Princess Ren, Kael announces, his voice carrying the ancient authority that makes the entire room instinctively quiet. Not now, not ever. My interest lies elsewhere, and no amount of political pressure will change that. You're bound to this kingdom's interests, Doran argues. You slept 2 centuries to protect this territory. Surely you understand the importance of securing stability through proper channels. I slept 2 centuries because sacrifice, real sacrifice, was required to protect against a threat this kingdom has forgotten ever existed. Kael says, I don't owe this current dynasty anything beyond what I already gave 400 years ago, and I certainly don't owe you my choice of companion, simply because that choice is inconvenient for your political ambitions. Then who? Doran demands. Who has claimed your interest instead? Kael turns, finding me in the crowd of witnesses where I've been standing, uncertain and terrified, throughout this entire confrontation. Her, he says simply, extending his hand toward me. The servant girl who woke me through genuine sacrifice instead of empty ceremony. The only person in this entire kingdom who's spoken to me like I'm worth knowing, not worth using. The room erupts into murmured shock, but I find myself walking forward anyway, taking his extended hand, understanding that whatever comes next, the political complications, the social upheaval, the enormous adjustment required for a servant to somehow exist alongside an ancient alpha power, none of it matters as much as the simple truth of choosing him and being chosen in return. This is unprecedented, Doran says, though his protest has lost much of its earlier force. Most things worth having are, Kael replies, echoing his own words from weeks earlier. And I feel something warm bloom in my chest at the recognition. Epilogue. The Chamber A year later. The sleeping chamber looks different than it did during my years of quiet, unremarkable service. The ceremonial silk is gone, replaced with actual furnishings. A space Kyle and I have transformed into something livable, a private retreat within the castle, where he continues adjusting to a world 2 centuries removed from the one he remembers, and where I continue learning what it means to matter to someone who could have chosen literally anyone else in the kingdom. We're not married. Not yet, though the political pressure has largely subsided as the kingdom's adjusted to the reality of an ancient Alpha King's unconventional choice. We're simply building something together, slowly, the way genuine connection actually requires, instead of the ceremonial performance that failed for 200 years to produce anything real. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the accident that started everything, the slipped dagger, the unexpected cut, the drops of blood that fell without ceremony or calculation onto silk that had absorbed 2 centuries of careful royal offering without ever once producing the result my clumsy accident achieved, instantly. Do you ever wonder, I ask Kael, one evening in the chamber that's become our shared space, what would have happened if I'd been more careful, if I hadn't cut my hand at all? I try not to, he says, because the alternative is imagining 200 more years of sleep, waiting for a sacrifice that royal ceremony was never going to provide. I'd rather focus on what actually happened, that somehow, against every reasonable expectation, the right person found her way to me anyway. Through an accident, I remind him. Through genuine sacrifice, he corrects. The accident was just the mechanism. The sacrifice was you, choosing to keep giving of yourself, your time, your honesty, your genuine interest, long after the initial magic had already done its work. That's not accident. That's choice, sustained over months, when you could have walked away at any point. I think about this, about the difference between the accident that woke him and the choice that's kept us together since. He's right. The accident was just the beginning. Everything after was choice.